What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back to continue diving into this Detroit Lions draft class, and today we're going to get started with the NFL draft, the players the Lions actually selected, and diving into each one of these players individually. Today we're going to start off with the first pick the Lions made in this year's draft. That's Jahmyr Gibbs. So let's get it started. Welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here, and yes, I'm so excited to get this thing started, man. I mean, we've done these series over the last few years, breaking down the players that the Lions drafted, and I wouldn't doubt if we came back and did another video on this player, because I just feel like there's so much to dive into with this player. And plus, I mean, it's a running back. It's just exciting. I was excited to break this player down. I was like, I don't want to wait. I just want to get into this one. I want to knock this one out and just talk about this player, watch this player. I mean, I saw him before. He was the one guy that I predicted the Lions would draft, even though I had it out of place. The Lions took him with their first pick, which I guess you could say was a little surprising. I don't know how many people expected that to be their top pick in this year's draft. From everything I've heard, it sounds like if Witherspoon was there at 6, they may have went that direction. He went number 5 to Seattle. So for the Lions at 6, and again, I don't know if this is true or not, it sounds like the Lions were considering taking him at 6, but they were able to trade out of that spot, acquire some draft capital. They ended up recovering pick number 34 from the Cardinals and a 5th round pick, which I believe ultimately they traded back up with, and they gave up pick number 81. So they moved out of 6 spot, moved back to 12, and took the running back right there out of Alabama. Now, again, some people might say, man, he could have got to 18. He could have got to the 2nd round, and, you know, I guess we'll never really know. We'll never really know if he could have got there or not. From everything I've heard, he wasn't going to make it to 18 for the Lions. So if they wanted him, they had to take him there, and they did that while also being able to acquire extra draft capital. So if really they were going to say, hey, we're taking this running back at 6 now that Witherspoon's not here, then it's great that they were able to move back and also still get him. But again, I don't know if any of that's true. It doesn't really matter. I mean, at this point in time, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is the players that we brought in, and this is an absolute animal. Oh my goodness, you fall in love watching this player, so I can understand it. Let's start with a quick little background here. Who in the world is Jahmyr Gibbs? Who is this guy? Well, Jahmyr Gibbs, if you don't know, he's a running back. I guess we could just start with that. But Jahmyr Gibbs is a former 4-star recruit coming out of high school that ultimately committed to Georgia Tech, and I guess he may have done that a little bit earlier in the process because there were other schools, some really big schools, that were trying to get him flipped late in the process, like Ohio State, Florida, LSU, Alabama, who he ultimately transferred to. They were trying to get him to flip later in the process. He was one of the top running backs coming out of his high school class, but he made the commitment to Georgia Tech. He's also from his hometown is Dalton, Georgia. He went to Dalton High School, so it makes sense as to why he would go to Georgia Tech based on just where he grew up. So he was there for 2 seasons, had a good career with Georgia Tech, kind of just burst onto the scene, and he actually had a pretty good career. You know, 2021, he averaged 5.2 yards per carry, 746 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns. He had a good career, 62 yards per game, but ultimately he decided to transfer out in 2022 to join Alabama, and I guess his reasoning behind that is he wanted an opportunity to go try to win a national championship. And even though they didn't do that this past year, they did make the Sugar Bowl, and they did play Kansas State, and he decided to play in that game. Even though, you know, a lot of guys, they opt out. They're like, I don't want to do it. You know, it's draft time. If I'm going to come out for the draft, I'm not going to, you know, play in a bowl game. But he decided to play in the bowl game. A lot of guys did. Bryce Young played in that bowl game, even though, when again, you may not have needed to. He decided to play in that game. They won that game, so I guess it was a good finish for him after all for Jahmyr Gibbs. But because of this, he's a very young player coming out, right? He's only played 3 seasons at the college football level. I mean, he is only 21 years old. You get a lot of older players that come out, but I think that's huge, especially considering that he's a running back, okay? That he is only 21 years old can be very important for shelf life, you know, with that position. But this is a 5'9", essentially 200-pound running back officially from Alabama, man. And maybe you've seen the testing scores, the fact that this guy ran a 4.36 40. He had a 33.5-inch vertical. Those were the 2 times that we had. And then you look at the measurables there, 9 1/4 inch hands, 30.5-inch arms. And then you start to dive into some of the statistics from this past season with Alabama. While he didn't crack 1,000 yards, he had a really good season. You see it at the bottom, 6.1 yards per carry on 926 yards. And even Brad hit on it. Like, when you get guys from Bama and you get guys from Iowa, you kind of just know what you're going to get. But specifically when you talk about Alabama, the competition that they faced, the fact that he was able to just step in and be that guy, like immediately he was that dude, didn't look like he missed any steps. I did feel like you saw some growth in terms of vision, things like that through the season, and some of those areas continued to need growth. You saw it in terms of fumbles for sure. He had 0 fumbles this past season. You could see that on the right here or the left. I think it's on your left actually. But he had 4 of those at Georgia Tech. It's something to kind of keep an eye on down. It usually happens late in the play, but you saw the awareness of it, especially when one time it got kind of knocked loose against Texas A&M. Everything after that, man, was 2 hands on the football, but 0 fumbles. I think that's pretty impressive. That's a big thing to point out there. You see 38 forced missed tackles this past season, only 2 drops according to Pro Football Focus on 103 catchable passes. Now, again, this is someone kind of doing that, so there could be some in there that's like, oh, maybe that one was catchable, and they're not counting that one, right? There were some ones that you could say were a little close in there, but for the most part, I went through a lot of his games, and there's not a lot of drops. I maybe saw 1 or 2 that I was like, yeah, I guess you would consider that a drop, but for the most part, he's got a really good hands. We'll talk about that. So that number is legit, and I do feel like the pass game impact is going to be much bigger, or could be much bigger in the NFL than what it was in college, right? This could be a massive part of his game. It's actually where I graded him out the highest in terms of what I think he can bring to the table at the NFL is his pass game impact. And look, when you're drafting running backs, especially in today's NFL, that pass game impact can be everything, right? That is huge for the grade. A guy that can do that can be, I think, picked in the first round. If you can't pass catch, all of a sudden, man, that value drops tremendously. You're not a third down back at that point in time, and there's a lot that goes into it, but the pass game is a massive factor for the running backs. And you can see by the gap that he attacked there, the rushing stats, the A gap is almost like 10 yards per carry there, and that's, I think, again, you get some of those 15 runs or 15 or more yards this past season, and you just had a couple in there that just broke for touchdowns, and maybe Arkansas had one of those runs in there. The other ones, B and C gap, don't necessarily stand out. You see where clearly he had the most attempts was on wide attacks, so more the D gap. I mean, just getting outside of the offensive tackle, essentially. These are according to PFF for 358 yards, which is 5.8 yards per carry. So I guess if you want a little glimpse on like, okay, hey, where should you use him? Well, that might be a little bit of an idea of where to use him. And then you also saw things like that pop up during the season, like Kansas State last game, Sugar Bowl, and you see how they start to utilize him in some certain ways, different alignments they put him in, throw him the football. You've heard maybe guys like Rick Spielman compare him to a Christian McCaffrey coming out because of the pass game impact that he brings. With all the numbers knocked out, you have a background of who this guy is, okay? Now let's talk about the player and what I saw on film when watching this guy, what I think he's going to bring to the table, okay? We're going to kind of go across the board here, but I want to start with the vision first. This is where I actually have, in terms of like the big traits, this is where I have maybe the lowest grade on him specifically, but when I say that, it's not a low grade, right? This is still an adequate grade for Jahmyr Gibbs. It's just not an area where I think he excels necessarily. You don't feel always like the instinctiveness as a runner where you're like, oh man, that's where he's going to win at the next level. It's just the pure vision. That's not to say it's bad. I like how he actually plays as a running back and how he attacks the approach. I mean, certain guys that have, played 5 years at running back coming out, this could actually be better. And I thought it did get better. I literally thought it got better at Alabama going through his games. I thought the vision improved in the approach and a little bit more confidence in the way that he attacked things as a runner. The fact that he runs through the play design. Okay, you're not going to have a lot of issues, I don't think, of where the play design is to do one thing and he's doing his own little thing. And then all of a sudden you get tons of negative plays because of it. You may get some good, but you're going to get a lot of bad there as well because he's just doing his own thing. He's going to be difficult to kind of rein in. He just wants to go, be super creative, bounce everything, make a whole bunch of cuts. That's not the type of style you're going to get here, right? He really works through the play design, whether that be a stretch run, whether that be a sweep with pulling offensive linemen and fouling his blocks. He plays through the run design, specifically on zone runs, which I think is an area where he's going to be super dynamic in the NFL, but on those zone runs, the wide zones, that he really plays through the play design until ultimately he gets cut off and he's forced to really bounce beyond that. Also have to like the flashes of patience that he utilizes when he's cutting back out of those zone runs. I think there was a really good example. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I'm going to throw the clip up, but I think it was Mississippi State. You don't get, I think, is a little bit more of that outside of the box creativity. And again, that's not a terrible thing, but I don't think you get a ton of that in terms of the vision. A lot of front side bounces, specifically if it's like an outside zone, if they're attacking the B gap maybe, for example, and it's inside of an offensive tackle, you may not get a ton of front side bounces, even though that lane actually may be opened up. He's going to stick more so to the play design than anything. So because of that, you're going to get instances where maybe something looks open and he may not attack that necessarily because he's going to play the play design pretty much for the most part throughout. And I think you can get a little bit tunnel vision when you talk about pressing the line of scrimmage, playing through the design, and then occasionally you'll get where, again, he doesn't always recognize seemingly some of the open rush lanes that are there. Maybe some of that's coached into it, but you don't see sometimes there's run lanes that are there that can be attacked, whether whether that's maybe just hitting it a little bit quicker where you can see it open up and he's still playing through the design. You're like, just go. And then he just keeps pushing the line of scrimmage, and then ultimately he finally bounces, but it's like you had that like a tick earlier. Or you'll get other times where I think, especially when you're attacking some of these inside gaps, where he really stays, to the play design, pressing the line of scrimmage, but you don't get some of those, off-schedule recognition of like, oh, the linebacker's not there. Let me just instinctively bounce out of this and go find that opening. Like, you don't get a ton of that, like, incredible instinctiveness in terms of a vision back really breaking through the front line. Now, when you get out to the second and third level, I think there's a lot more creativity there, but I think when you're breaking through the initial line of scrimmage, you can get some of that. But his skill set definitely matches a guy that's going to have, I think, a ton of success, especially in a lot of these outside stretching plays, zone plays, because of his skill set. He could be so dynamic in those areas. But the same thing when you get him on sweeps, things like that, allowing him to attack outside. Even though a lot of those, you saw a lot of the pulling offensive linemen, you didn't get tons of bounces towards the edge through that. A lot of times he kind of stuck with the play design, and we followed the initial inside, pulling blocker. Let me bounce inside and take this inside cut, rather than sometimes recognizing when I could bounce outside. But then back to the things that you really love here, the ability to get skinny. I just kind of touched on that. I think that shows up a lot when either getting up and pressing up on an offensive lineman on a zone run, or also at the same time when following, whether that's a lead fullback, whether that's a following offensive lineman, that he closes that airspace to stick behind that lead blocker before breaking it off ultimately, when he really gets like, okay, here's where I feel comfortable with breaking this, ditching this, and getting upfield. And then that's just a dynamic part of his game, which we'll get to. But it makes it very difficult for defenders to get a clean shot on him. You have that real ability to get skinny. You have some lean, you have some ankle flexion. Now, into some of the skill set as just being a runner from that aspect. You talk about some of this athleticism, and the testing scores, I think, sometimes don't even like seemingly do it justice. But you watch him and you see just the way that he launches laterally, the amount of ground, the depth that he can cover when he launches, when he makes those initial cuts. That shows up, behind the line of scrimmage, at the line of scrimmage. Those initial launches behind the line, it makes it difficult. You'll see it's very difficult for defenders to track him down in pursuit. Occasionally you'll get one. I think LSU had one where they were able to get him behind the line, but I think ultimately there's a defensive tackle that cut him off. But it's difficult for guys behind the line to track him down because he just launches laterally, covering so much depth when he does that. But then he's able to transition that lateral movement into a vertical transition, which is just nasty. It's so explosive. You start to see the ankle flexion, I think the strength there, the ability to just plant, stick, and just go, just get upfield. Like, that is one of the explosive move that he has in his toolbox to, again, be moving laterally, plant, stick, and just get upfield. It's nasty. That was the word I used. It's absolutely nasty. And when he's decisive and just decides to go, you see plays like this where he just blows by everybody, and it's immediate. It's like you push the gas and he's just gone, and then the celebration in the end zone is like, hey, where was everybody? That was just way too easy. When you watch him as a runner, the change of speed, it's special. Like, it's special. And I don't even think he always uses this the best. Like, I think sometimes he does a little bit too much, and we'll talk about that. But the change of speed ability, the suddenness that he has, the stop and start, I mean, it has flashes of special. And you see, and there's like, I don't know how a guy's supposed to hang with that. Like, he consistently gets the edge when he wants the edge. There's a lot of running backs that may have the speed in certain situations. When he wants to get the edge, which is why he's so dynamic and tough on all these outside runs, and whether that's getting him on a jet sweep, because he can just attack the edge and get the corner on linebackers. I just don't see many linebackers keeping up with him. Some defensive backs just can't keep up with him in that sense. He's going to get the edge seemingly whenever he wants to get it. He's got really strong ankles, really strong like lower body in that sense. You see it with the ankles. When you see it early in his runs, a lot of times the quick feet keeps him closer to the ground before he's ultimately going to make his cut. And when you get that, you get those strong ankles, and I think you'll see some of his ability to recover early in reps. Sometimes guys will get on his like ankles and he doesn't go down. It's like, how is he doing that? I think he's got really strong ankles. You see in some of the cutting as a receiver on the runs when he's able to plant, stick, and go, but you also see it behind the line of scrimmage. Now, once he breaks beyond that, right, you start to get out of the kind of that quick feet stage. Then it's when you get that lateral burst or the vertical burst where it's just boom, boom, and he's kind of launching forward. The distance that he covers is just, it looks fake sometimes. Leap through oncoming contact. This shows up again a lot of times between the tackles when a guy's trying to reach out and get some contact on him or really get a clean shot on him when he's like breaking out of the offensive line, when he's getting past that, first wave. When he's doing that and all of a sudden he's breaking to the second level, he easily has that kind of burst to just kind of tap the gas and he's launching forward. It looks like, That's what it reminds me of. It reminds me of someone that's driving a very fast car that's kind of just hitting at 40, and then when he just taps a little bit, you can just kind of see it jump forward. That's kind of the sense that I get when I watch this player. That ability, you'll see a lot of times with oncoming traffic, contact, breaking into the second level, you'll see him kind of launch forward to, again, make it difficult for a defender to get a clean shot on him. So that's when you get, they're going to have to kind of contort their body, maybe try to bring him down with an arm tackle, and it just makes it difficult. And I think that plays into the fact that a lot of times he's falling forward, finishing his runs, falling forward. He finishes with the legs, but I think an example against Arkansas. But that's what I like. I think when you watch him, and maybe you get the sense if you look at the numbers or if you watch his highlights, you may think like, okay, because I haven't watched like a highlight video, but you may get the sense like, oh, this guy's just fast. He's just a speedster. He's a scat back. He's this, he's that. Like, yes, he's only 199, and I do think there's an ability to potentially put on some weight here. Now, I don't know what he officially was weighing at Georgia Tech, right? But I felt like in 2022, he looked bigger than he did in 2021. He just looked like a bigger running back to me. The frame looked a little bit more filled out, so maybe there's even more that you can add on to that. But I think he's got a pretty sturdy build. Like, I think there's legitimate strength here. Specifically, you see with the legs, they're always finishing plays to the point that I just made, very lower body. But then also, he's got some legitimate upper body strength as well. I think it's a plus upper body strength that continue to potentially be built upon, right? It's not like, you're not getting like what was it, a Roshan Johnson or something. You're not getting that, but you got some plus upside strength. I think that shows off in, especially when both defenders are not balanced. When a defender and him are not balanced, and he gets into contact, and it's kind of an even battle in that sense. You'll see there's a way against Georgia Tech right off the reception. He just runs the dude over. Like, he has some legit upper body strength. I think that cannot be overlooked when you watch him for more upside that he can grow into. He's still a very young player, so that's kind of what I get the sense of. But also, a small little note I had in here, I just threw it in here, is that I feel like his cuts look a little bit better when they're off his right foot. Okay, I'm just throwing it out there. Now, he had an injury against Ole Miss. It was a twisted ankle. He returned for the Kansas State game, but I thought his cuts just looked a little bit more springy off the right foot. Okay, I could be missing on that one, but I just kind of got that sense, and it was something that was sticking in my head, so I just wrote it down. On to taking on some of these defenders. I think one issue is he doesn't consistently win the leverage battle. Now, he's only 5'9", so naturally he's not someone that has to get super low to win this battle, but I don't think that's where he wins right now. And I think there's upside here. It shows up between the tackles as well. It's also not really a style as a running back, so it's understandable, but he's not going to be the guy that's consistently you're noticing is getting under the pads of the defender, getting under the pads of the defender. And because of that, you get him a little bit high in the contact. Not too bad, but just a little bit high, sometimes very early in reps when he's taking the snap. And because of that, you don't get some of the drive consistently that maybe you would like to see. And I think some of that is he doesn't consistently dominate the leverage battle, getting that sink and just drive. And again, I think some of that's to the style. He's so twitchy. He has that twitchy burst that just wants to take off. Inconsistency in terms of just being decisive, sinking, and then just driving. He wants to kind of just hop. He wants to kind of just burst through the line of scrimmage. So when you get that and he's kind of trying to squeeze through a gap and there's a defender waiting for him, when you get kind of the bouncy type of running back, that's not necessarily just saying, you know what, I'm just going to sink down and try to run this guy over. That's not really the style that he approaches blocks with. He presses up on blocks, so you'll see him kind of stick to being in that athletic stance where he's pushing up on blocks. But if he's not getting that force created through, being able to build that up, which you don't see a lot of because of his style as a back, then you don't get necessarily the consistent leverage wins, to just be pushing people back defensively. But again, I think there's some more upside there to get more movement because I think he's a pretty strong runner. It just doesn't show up because he's not always winning that battle. Now, when you talk about getting to the second and third level, he's one of these players that I feel like gets caught just doing a little bit too much. You could say, man, he's his own worst enemy sometimes. Like, he's just doing a little bit too much as a runner. Now, this isn't always the case, which is good. If this was always the case, it'd be more of an issue for me, but it's not. But when you get him one-on-one with a defender in space, I think there was a good example. You had him on Derek Hall on Auburn when he was getting outside the tackle box there. Now, I think a lot of times you'll see him try to set up defenders, the initial defender, while also setting up the second defender as well. Like, kind of like, okay, I want to get by this guy, but then I see the next guy, I'm looking at him. So while I initially want to set it up to so I can bounce outside, I see the defender sitting outside, so now I want to hit another cut and then bounce back inside. And that is where you can get some issues. But I think if you just sometimes would just be a little bit more decisive in the sense that, okay, just make your move and then go, you just do a little bit too much. Like the stop and start change of speed, it's nasty. Guys just can't hang with it. And I think that's something that could lead to even more missed tackles forced at the next level than even showed up at Alabama. That's not to say he was bad at it. That's not to say that at all, but I think he could have even more there, because for me, I think he just caught doing a little bit too much. Like, he has the shiftiness, change of speed, that explosiveness. He has the ability to launch, where there could be a little bit more there. So you talk about getting into contact with leverage. I don't think it's always the consistent way that he wins, and then also sometimes I think he does a little bit too much as well. But now, because of this incredible acceleration, it can work against him, and I do feel like I've seen this happen a couple of times, where you get a little bit of a difficulty for him to really tap the gas. You know what I'm saying? Like, not just kind of speed up a little bit or change speeds, but I'm saying when he hits it, he hits it. Like, there's a launch to it. So when he does that, right, if he really hits on that gas and it gets on the edge and he's like, I want to get around you, but then all of a sudden he wants to slam on the brakes, you can see where it can be a little bit difficult for him to completely sink without having to beat the drum too much there, to really stop himself and then be able to make a cut out of it. So because of that, sometimes he's so explosive that it makes it difficult, and you'll see him sometimes like slip down and things of that nature. I would like to see him consistently bring out a little bit more of that second like move, like to combo some of his, run moves, the creativity that he has, win out in space, second, third level. I would like to see him combine a lot of the change of space, the burst, the juke that he likes to go to, where he's just basically changing directions laterally. I would like to see him combine that. He uses the stiff arm a lot too. I would like to see him combine that with a secondary spin off, because what you get a lot of times is that when you have a second defender, and even if he makes that first guy move with one of his cuts, you get into that second defender, and then he's so explosive out of that cut that it's difficult for him to, again, plant and then cut the other way. He could, and I think Eric Gray does this, but Eric Gray doesn't have the burst. I think he did this at Oklahoma, but he doesn't have the burst. At Georgia Tech, and I don't even think it was purposely done. I think he was kind of falling over, but where he gets that stab, cut, and then if he spins off of that, he shows some ankle flexion. Maybe it's not something, but I think if that was something that he consistently started to kind of add, I think he could have more success beating the second defender beyond just trying to beat the first guy. And I think that's something that definitely could be in the cards for him. Kind of an idea that I thought when I was watching it, but I think that's something that could be added to him to give more consistency there. So to recap, I think if his vision got a little bit more creative in that sense, a little more off schedule, he is so tough to tackle in space. But I think too much of this, the lack of consistency in terms of pacing for efficiency, he's got so much wiggle, he should be impossible to stop in open field. But right now it's a little bit hit and miss because the pacing is just all out of whack. Sometimes he's going way too fast to cut. And when he kind of slows himself down and hits that right pace to tie along with the vision, then all of a sudden I think he's unstoppable. So I think there's legitimate growth there. Now moving on to the pass game, and this is an area where I actually gave him my highest grade because I'm like, dude, this guy could be special in this area. So when Brad Holmes calls him a weapon, I see why. Because even though he wasn't like getting 100 receptions, he did have 44 receptions this past year, which is second in school history for Alabama. Okay, now he didn't even play like all the games fully this past year, so that's a massive part of it for his first year there. The consistent confidence that he built with Bryce Young and the backup quarterback when he stepped in as well this past season was obvious. He makes himself the quarterback's best friend because he sells out. You see the confidence in traffic, and I think probably the best part of it, honestly, is when anything gets off script. And meaning, doesn't necessarily mean the quarterback has to get outside the pocket, but if the initial route isn't there and the quarterback's getting away from him, he's going to find a way to try to get himself in the lenses of the quarterback so that he sees him and creates space late. That's something that's super difficult, first off, for any linebacker or safety, anybody that's matched up with him trying to deal with because they just can't hang with him. But at the same time, he does a really good job making himself a threat as the play starts to kind of wear on. He doesn't get the ball initially. Speaking of that, though, the pass game, natural pass catching technique, like very natural, soft hands. You see the fluidity in terms of flipping his hands. The technique is very sound. He's got a feel for attacking zone holes, meaning I see that really pop up when you watch like some of the option routes, and I think this is an area where he's going to be dynamic. If you think back to last year, I think back to a lot of our games where the option routes were such a big part. Think back to the final game of the year where we started to bring some of that out against Green Bay, DeAndre Swift. I think going in at half, we brought some of those out. The option routes, I think we do to a lot of times to our receivers, Khalif St. Brown, but he's going to be crazy here because the stop and start after the catch, this is where you talk about we can put him in a slot. Option routes, he's going to make money on if you want him to. I really think he could be one of the most dominant option route players in the league. And that sounds weird. It's like, what the heck does that even mean? I don't know. But that's what I think when I watch. I'm like, he's going to be so dynamic in the first 5 yards. Where if you give a quarterback that outlet of, hey, if he just has time in the pocket to read where he's going to break inside or outside, this guy's going to be an absolute problem there. He has a feel for attacking zone holes, when to sit, when to stay away from defenders. He has a sense of where they are to kind of position himself in a good spot. That way he's not running himself directly into traffic. He's very coordinated at the catch point, very fluid body control. You'll see him flip himself around so naturally. It looks like a receiver just with ease, soft hands pass catcher. You get to the pass protection side, which is the side where, you say, okay, he may not be used here as much, but you do want to have this if he's going to be the guy. He's a third down back. Like, we already know this, right? But you do want to have this. Now, that's not to say Lions could have put him in a slot or something or kick him out wide like they did at Alabama. They moved him everywhere. Tight end, slot, they line him wide. They put him everywhere. That's not to say you couldn't do that and have someone else in to pass protect if you wanted someone to, but if you did ask him to pass protect, can he hang? I'm going to be honest. When I first watched him, I had some real concerns here. I have less concerns now rewatching and just watching all of these games because I'm like, oh no, he approaches this the right way. Like, you can watch him say, okay, he approaches the pass protection side the right way for sure. There is legit toughness. There's recognition. Now, early in this past season, I thought there was a few breakdowns. Specifically, you get interior rush. Not to say it was necessarily on him, but, there'd be breakdowns in terms of the lineman may take the same guy that he's trying to block and then someone would come through free. I didn't see that as much as the season went on, so I think that got kind of figured out. But he was an attacking style pass protector, and you will see it. Look at this block against Texas. He literally tackled the dude. I saw this. I was like, that can't be Jahmyr Gibbs. I watched it again. I was like, oh, that was Jahmyr Gibbs. Maybe that was a play that Brad Holmes sitting there watching, in a crowd and was like, oh, snap. Like, yo, I like that guy. When you see that, you're like, okay, this is what I want to see. You want to see that competitive toughness. That's going to be there. That is absolutely going to be there in pass pro. Now, I think where he gets an issue is he can be slipped. He doesn't come in a lot of times with a secure base. His frame may be a little bit of an issue, but he doesn't come in breaking down with secure base. A lot of times he's just attacking. He almost approaches blitzers like he's the linebacker. It's a little bit weird, like he's going to wrap him up and tackle him. You'll get a lot of, where he'll kind of just throw his shoulder and upend some of the bigger edge rushers, which is fine, cut block. But he's not a guy with a consistent pass blocking technique, but the willingness and awareness is absolutely there. Getting back to the pass catching side of things, when you talk about the route usage and the ways they used him, I think his route tree may be even deeper. A lot of different routes that they used him on. They'd split him out wide, they run him on a lot of vertical routes or curl routes. They put him in the slot and they'd run some option routes with him. They'd leave him in the backfield, swing routes, screen routes, angle routes was kind of the depth of the route tree. A lot of the things that you saw from him. Occasionally get a wheel route thrown in there. But when you talk about the swings or the screens, I always call them swing screens, but they're just screens technically. But when you get those types of routes, I love how he uses his eyes early. As soon as he's breaking out of the backfield, his eyes are on the defense. His immediate look is on the defense. He scans the field, says, okay, where are the defenders at? And then he gets himself back in a position. That way he can concentrate on catching the football. That way he's not taking his eyes off the ball to make that grab to see the second level. His immediate look is scanned, then it's get back to the ball, and then he's able to concentrate through the catch point. And you'll see it. He'll recognize when he's open. He lets the quarterback know, like, hey, I'm wide open, dude. Throw it over here. So you get that. Now, you do get him taking the eyes off the ball. Specifically, I thought on these angle routes, right? When he was breaking the middle of the field, when it was a cut, when it was a break, and then he was able to explode out of it. Sometimes they run him on like some drags across the field from a wide position. Not as much there. More of the angle routes when attacking the middle against like linebackers, where you get him wanting to catch and run. And when he's trying to catch and run, sometimes he would take his eyes off the ball there. Now, he didn't have any really issues with drops in that sense. Like, he wasn't dropping passes because of it, but you'll see his eyes start to drift off as he's catching the football. He has extreme confidence in his hands, which is huge. He's not going to slow down to try to corral it. He'll catch the thing on his shoulder like this. I saw one catch where he just caught the ball on his shoulder and he was just still moving at the same speed. I'm like, that's what a receiver does. So he's very confident in his hands. So you're not going to have issues there. Sometimes he takes his eyes off the ball. The positive is how fast that catch to tuck technique is masterful, man. Even at Georgia Tech, there was the catch that he had where he took a monster hit, got back up, it didn't even phase him. But you saw what I really liked was how fast he was able to catch that ball while in midair and tuck before he even got back to the ground. That process is so smooth, and that allows him to take off. He's trying to glide through the catch to just kind of roll. So that may be something to keep an eye on. Occasionally that could probably pop up. One of the drops that I did see, which wasn't, an easy pass catch, it was a little bit out in front, but one drop that I did see, and you're like, oh, is that because the linebacker's there? Very next time it comes around, you see him extend outside of his body, snatch the ball. He's trying to sit down his own hole, but he snatches it away from his body, and you're like, look, he bounced back. This did not get in his head. Dominate, like I'm saying, as an option route guy. First off, linebackers can't hang. I don't know how a linebacker is going to match up in man coverage, so you're almost going to have to pass him off in zone coverage. You put a linebacker on him, I don't really give him much of a shot. He's really good with his pacing here, right? Certain guys, depending on how they're covering him, how the leverage is, he may kind of slow himself into the break and then just launch out of it. Other times, he just flies through it immediately on some of those angle routes. Occasionally, it was way more rare than I thought it was, was when I initially watched him, because I only saw a couple games like, oh, this happens too much. Doesn't happen that much, but you'll get him flying through these routes and he'll start to stumble, and that makes it difficult for the quarterback to throw it if you're stumbling, because he doesn't know, should I throw it or is this guy going to fall? But that didn't show up as much of an issue as I thought it would. As I continue to just watch more and more games of him, I didn't really notice it as much. But linebackers aren't going to match up. He legitimately can separate from defensive backs well. You saw it occasionally against safeties. He has the burst and acceleration, long speed if you throw him on drags. He could separate from safeties and linebackers. He's going to dominate those matchups. You're going to probably have to put safeties on him if you continue to just go to the well and you're trying to man up on us and he just continue to say, I'm just going to throw it to this guy. You keep putting the linebacker on him. I don't know how much success you're going to have. Even with all the athletes at linebacker, I just don't know the kind of success you're going to have, especially when he gets into multi-breaks, because that's where separation just seems to kind of come with ease. He leans through breaks, and that's why. It's that ankle flexion. You see it on his cuts. He got to lean into a break and just kind of explode off, and they're so tight and crisp. Not all the things kind of widen out. Some receivers, they widen out. There's some crisp, tight cuts there, so the separation is created almost instantly through the route. So for me, I think he's going to be dominant on option routes. We love to do those. We did it last season. Yeah, you can throw him screens. You can do all these things, but when you throw him an option route, that's where I think he's going to be a problem, because he's going to be able to make a decision. Do I go inside, outside? He's going to read that. He knows how to hit zone holes. He's going to attack the football, and he's going to immediately get the catch to run. So, again, you speak about just players, playing towards our quarterback strengths, distributor, to get the ball in their hands, let them go make plays. He's going to be dynamic there, and I think that's where, as a coach, you could fall in love, or as a GM or a scout or whoever, you can say, man, I really like this guy, because that's something that could be special at the next level. And he's not going to be the, short yardage back. I like how he falls forward a lot, but he's not the short yardage back. He's not the consistent pound it between the tackles. I think you'll get some inconsistency, especially early, with vision there, decisiveness, sitting and creating like some of the tough yards with leverage. You're going to get some, I think, hit and miss results if you ask him to consistently attack between the tackles. It's not to say he can't attack the inside gaps, because he does, but I think for him, you get wide flowing plays with his easy edge speed, the cutback ability. You get some of those, and you allow him to kind of gain his confidence, maybe open up a little bit more of the creativity. Now you could really have something going there. You can have him follow offensive linemen, but he needs some time. I think this is a guy that's not all the way there yet. Like, there's definitely improvement that could be made, specifically in the vision aspect. I gave him an adequate grade, but when you talk about plus contact balance, and sometimes I think for him, he does a little bit to himself. Either he's doing a little bit too much, he doesn't maybe always get the leverage into contact. Sometimes he'll maybe step on someone because he's trying to like stretch out and just kind of create space. You'll get little things like that, right? Because he likes to have those quick feet early and then kind of launch himself away from contact. So he's difficult to get clean shots on, which is probably the best part. And I think he's got strong ankles for really legit balance. But the pass game impact, to me, honestly could be special. It could be special for a running back. Across the board, I got high grades on this player. I think he's a really good to great playmaker at this point in time. He's got great pass catching. He's got solid pass protection with upside. I think he's a tough player. The fact that he didn't fumble this past year is massive. There's special teams value. All right, the guy literally played kick returner for both Georgia Tech and Bama. And even though I wasn't like seeking out all of his return attempts to see exactly what he was doing there, when they did see them and they would flash to me, I was like, oh, that was a good return. A lot of his returns were actually pretty darn good. He's probably not going to be the best in the league. You look at his stats, he averaged 22.9 on only 8 attempts though with Alabama. The leader last year was actually our Justin Jackson with 26.6. All right, so give him some love. But I think at the same time, some of that's also the group you have around you. I think that's very dependent on who's around you. It's not just a kick returner. And when you speak to that, we have a very good special teams unit. So I don't know if the Lions would even attempt to use him there. They may just be like, dude, we're not letting this guy play on the kickoff team. But it's also a way to kind of earn your stripes. And maybe that is a position that they want to put him in. Freshman, he missed some time there with Georgia Tech with an injury, so only played in 6.5 games that season, but he averaged 25.6 yards per kick return, and that would have ranked 22nd nationally. But again, talk about 26.6 for Justin Jackson. There's actually, I think, a plus ability here to be a kick returner. Not so much of the punt returner maybe aspect, but definitely could be a legitimate kick returner option if the Lions want to go that route. I don't know if they'd even do that. This past year, he had an ankle injury late against Ole Miss. Apparently his ankle got twisted according to Saban, but he's able to return for the Kansas State game, play there. He was also injured Kansas 2020, as I touched on there. He was on crutches that season, but I think you get legitimate toughness here. Even Mississippi State or like Texas A&M, he was dinged up in that game. You could see he was like kind of holding his shoulder. He didn't seemingly want to come out of the game. And then the coach was like, dude, what's going on? He's like, yeah, he got my shoulder or something, like maybe his collarbone. Very next possession, they had the ball. He was right back on the field running. So I think you're getting a very tough player here, and you watch. He seems to have his priorities like the way that I think you would want in terms of this guy just wants to win. Like, he wants to play for a winner. He's young. I think his legs are still pretty fresh. I think there's room to grow as a running back. It's not like we know what he's going to be in the NFL exactly as a runner. I think there's upside here, and there's also things that could be a little bit of issues early, but I think the pass game is going to set him apart. And, we talk about Swift and, wishing him the best. Swift really improved in pass pro, but we always kind of looked at him as like the pass game back. But I never really thought like, man, he's a great pass catching back. When he got the ball, he could take off with it. He had some really nice catches in there, but I think this is a better pass catcher. I think this guy's going to give you consistent, dominant performance as a pass catcher. This is someone I almost want to just give him like, 10, 15 touches a game at least. But, like, you want to give him, like, 5, 6 receptions a game. Like, that seems like minimum. You just want to get the ball in this guy's hands, line him up a lot of different spots. I think even Alabama wasn't as creative as they could have been with him. But whenever teams seemed to get dull offensively, it was let's find a way just to get him the football. Because this guy is the kind of guy that, you want to give him a lot of touches, right? Because it's not going to consistently break, especially on the wide zone stretches. You're going to get plays that are negative. There's a game at Georgia Tech, he had negative 10 yards rushing. Because you get those kind of stretches and they continue behind the line of scrimmage, and it's like, yeah, that can happen. There's a downside to it. But if you think about the linemen that we brought in, a lot of zone backgrounds there. If you think about it, we got the guy from UCF, which could be more of a front side, more of a right tackle, but we got a lot of guys that can have played in the zone scheme. So when you speak to Jahmyr Gibbs' skill set, I think he'll be a very dominant zone runner. I think he's very good there. So I would expect a lot of zone running, a lot of trying to spread it out. You could definitely get him between the tackles, let him get some mix in some quick hitters there, like Travis Etienne, where it's kind of just like, hey, plant, hit the A gap, right? We're going to have some inside zones mixed in here as well. Some zone counters could even be thrown in there as well, that kind of thing. That's not to say you can't follow the polars, but give him a really, you want to just give him touches, right? Running or catching the football, you just want touches because you know that if he makes one guy miss, it's like, oh. Especially if he's already at the second level. He catches the ball on a linebacker and he makes that guy miss, which he's very capable of doing, and I think he could be even better at the next level. You are like, hold your breath, because there's not a lot of guys that can catch this dude. That's where he's a problem. And he finishes runs. You'll see it. He finishes runs. He starts to have kind of a knack and a feel for kind of leaning and instinctive at the third level, but he finishes runs. So I think he's going to be an absolute problem. I mean, he's a weapon. You shouldn't just label him as a running back. I can see why the Lions really liked him, and I can see why they like the fit even better here, because as much as Bijan, I think, is such a great running back, this guy could be special in the pass game. And I think his athleticism and just the skill set, the power, the youth, it's like, this guy is going to be way more than just a running back. He should be way more than just a running back, and I think he's going to change a lot. You remember Todd Gurley? He led the team in receptions the 1 year with Jared Goff. He's even more dynamic in that sense. So what do you think is going to happen when you start putting this guy everywhere? Some teams reportedly, like we're talking about, we kind of want to use him as a slot. We want to use him like a receiver. That's how good he is in the pass game. So I'm excited to just see this guy play with the Lions, man. He's electric. He's going to be fun to watch, and I'm just excited to see it, man. With that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This was, maybe a little bit of a surprise pick, but again, I'm not really even focused on where he took him. It's just who we got. And I'm going to say, man, this combination of him and Montgomery is nasty. I mean, this is nasty. I think this guy could be very special in the league. Maybe not immediately in terms of a runner. It may take a second there. You'll get some flashes, I think. But in the pass game, I think it's going to be immediately like, oh, okay, this guy's different. Like, he's on another level as a pass catcher. There's a catch against Texas. Play breaks down, finds the open spot, catches contested. He had multiple contested grabs where it was like, he just took that away from the defender. It was like 3 or 4, I think, off the top of my head, just pulling it away from the guy. Strong hands in context. So, yeah, this guy's going to be on a different level as a pass catcher, which is going to make him scary. Let me know your thoughts, comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.